talk is a lot about becoming a cyborg. And as you can see, there's a lot of reasons that we would want to become a cyborg, because this is a terrible transitional stage here. I'm holding on to one device to play the music, another device to click the slides, and then all the power performing for them.
Would you like me to be Vanna?
No, it's all right. Yeah, that's cute. That also goes in my talk, because that assumes that people know who Vanna White is, and the question of context is another thing I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, so let me get rid of this and we'll go forward. So my point is that music is being made different today, and it points to the way that we're changing as human beings. GarageBand is something any 5-year-old can do. You download the app, you put it in you drag tracks together, and instantly you have music. Because we're not all 5-year-olds, let me give you a demonstration for how that works. So in GarageBand, you don't need to know how to play an instrument. In fact, you don't even need to know what an instrument is. You might just need to see where it has loops, where you can cut right to the chase. And you can take a loop at random. Here I took a loop called piano. Yeah, we're having some frequency interference. Anyway, so you take that, and then all you do is you drag it. You drag it onto the screen, and you might want to add other things. You can drag drums, or how about a harmonica? It all works fine, and then when you're done, you have a song. Okay, so but suppose you don't know anything about instruments. Suppose all you need, you only have you're a music lover, but you're only 5 years old. So maybe you know moods. So Apple lets you pick moods. You can choose a mood, like for instance, a mood, I chose a mood that's called electric. And I just dragged 3 tracks at random, and this is what you got. Not great, but passable, and you're only 5 years old. So it doesn't matter. But this is instant. This is instant. Now what about for older 5-year-olds? Well, for older 5-year-olds, there are other apps. One I really enjoy is Metasynth, which is created by Eric Wanger, who actually did a lot of the plugins for Photoshop. And he has a visual metaphor for his world of music. And so what you see as a painting gets translated into sound. The higher up you go on the painting, the higher the notes are. And the colors show you where it's going to be, where in space you're going to hear the music. Now, this can sound any way you want because you choose all these parameters. So here's one of the ways this design might sound, this fractal design. Actually works well with the feedback we're getting. But then you can fool around with the image. You can blur the image, or you can cut it up and slice and dice it, and then you'll get something like a rhythm. You can change the tones of the image, and so turn it into a pentatonic scale and get ambient sounds that are like the film music. Something that could be the background for a lot of the music we hear today. A lot of the films we see today. So this is how music is being made today. So what does it mean? Well, there's a lot of things that are changing about the way we work as human beings. One thing you notice, and it came out in another TED Talk today, is that the editing process, which used to be the end of things, is now the starting point for creativity. The performance, which used to be the end, is now the beginning. Someone performs something, that performance is sampled, you drag those samples into a track, and then you actually have your piece of music. It's no accident that a DJ is actually the symbol of the modern performer today. And the music we hear today is all like that. The #1 Billboard song for the new year was The Monster by Eminem. And it's called The Monster by Eminem featuring Rihanna. And that tells you about the whole editing process of the song. It starts out with Rihanna singing music that could have been written maybe in the 80s, kind of an R&B thing. And it's treated as a sample. As the music's going on, and then it goes for 8 measures. You drag that into something like GarageBand, then you drag in the rap. And here we have Eminem rapping, maybe in the style of late 90s. And that will go, and then it'll alternate back and forth. This is the way it's put together. It's an engineered piece. The other thing that's fascinating about it is that it's combining musics from different times, or at least seems to be different times, but it doesn't matter. It all goes together. In fact, Rihanna and Eminem maybe never even met each other, for all we know. There are just 2 tracks in this thing. So that's one thing that's different. Another thing that's different, we're all aware of it, is that we've become slaves to the software. When we used pencils and fountain pens and typewriters, those were tools that we really could master because they didn't change much during our lifetime, and we could use them expertly. But today the software is changing so fast that it's all we can do to keep up with it, just to master most of the things on the surface. Most of us never get into depth. How many of you look at your manuals, right? This big, and most people say, I would never read that. And that's because there's so much in it, and we want the power that comes with it. But what's happening is the tools now are creative, just like the works we're trying to put in them. And so that's something that's very new. I noticed that music is now more seen than heard. I mean, God, it took hundreds of years to get to the point where music could be just something that we heard. And now it's seen. We see a music video. We watch a music video. We watch music in film. We watch music in video games. And so that's another thing that's happened. Music has become an accompaniment to image. I think the best metaphor, though, for what's going on today is iTunes. iTunes presents music as an infinite sea of tracks. This is perfect because this is what it is. One track might be a Mahler symphony that lasts 1 or 2 hours. Another track might be a hip-hop tune. Another track might be a short commercial soundbite or a ringtone. They're all the same. There's a kind of democratization to all these things. Everything in music now is just a track. And so that creates this infinite surface, this quality of an infinite surface, which I'm going to get to. Musicians are in a panic because the distribution is so easy now. Like you see, a 5-year-old can create a piece of music in 5 minutes and send it to the world. So the perceived value has gone down. And as we've seen record stores disappear, album sales going down, musicians are also in a panic because music licensing is going down. Services like Spotify are negotiating extremely low prices. So musicians are wondering how they're going to earn money other than selling t-shirts. So that's another thing new. One thing I find especially interesting is the end of context. And the idea that you can put everything together now is so much the way we think. It used to be a debate. Debate used to be, and I hear this in music circles all the time, okay, if you're going to bring in Appalachian fiddling or you're going to bring in a bodhran or whatever, shouldn't you know something about what the music, where it comes from and how it's played and the ways that it's used so that you're informed of it and your music will have that. That used to be one argument. That argument has been completely blown away. The answer is no, you don't have to know anything about anything, but you can use it if it works, if it sounds good. And that's what we're getting. We're getting all of our artwork now is this amazing postmodern eclectic mishmash of things. And it is fascinating. It's just like the iTunes track, this huge vast surface. But no one has a context for where it came into. If I throw a piece of Mahler into my music, or if I throw a piece of hillbilly music, it's the same thing. It's just something that may get attention, but we can't expect our audience to know anything about it. And that brings a really interesting point. What about the audience? We, the audience, what are we expected to know? There are so many things we're expected to know. Billboard magazine lists over 1,500 genres of music. Where are we going to start? That's just like the tracks in iTunes. So this is a big question for us as an audience. And this is my mantra of what the arts are signaling for what we are becoming. We are worldwide and 1 inch deep. It's this vast surface. Before, we used to go down. We go down deep in things. But now the surface is so big, all we can do is skim, just like when you're skipping a rock. It's too, we're consuming, we want to consume the whole thing because we want to have an instantaneous connection to it all. So this is how we're changing as human beings, and the arts are pointing to that. The question is whether it's evolution or devolution. Well, I think we're hunching forward, and we're hunching forward to become cyborgs, as you saw with all my equipment here. This is just a very rough transition. We want this transition because the speed and power are so dramatic. They're just irresistible. One of the things, though, that should give pause, and what I've titled my talk is The End of Time. Once you start getting rid of sequence and narrative, and instead you just want to have a vast surface without context, the question is, do you really have a before and after? Perhaps time is now at an end, and we're living in an eternal present. And that's one of the things we have to consider. How many of you have noticed that when you go on the internet, it's sometimes very hard to find a date for when the information was written? No one talks about that, but if they're not news stories, it's very hard to find. If you maybe compare two articles, hard to know which one came first. And this is part of it. Everything is just kind of in our present. We don't have context. Many of us see these Facebook posts go virally in which they kind of go in cycles, and people say, oh yeah, I got that 2 years ago, but it's brand new for the person who just got it. This should be a beacon for us that we're losing time. Physicist Stephen Hawking actually talked about this in a kind of poke at the Vatican in a cosmology conference. He talked about maybe there was no beginning, maybe no singularity. Maybe the universe didn't have what we call a beginning because time didn't exist. That is very much the spirit of how we live today. The guy who really nailed it for me, though, was Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan was a cultural philosopher from the 1960s. He's famous for saying the medium is the message. But he wrote in a book called Understanding Media really about our time. He said, we now live in a time when narrative and the sequence is over. That came from the printing press. Shakespeare, Beethoven, all of that was part of a long sequence, and that's how we understood knowledge. He said, we now live in the electric age. That's over. In the electric age, what we want is we want to have speed, and we don't have time for this depth. Instead, communication will occur in very, very short bursts. He said this 50 years before the invention of Twitter. But what I find so powerful is this little exhortation that I have here on the screen, where he talks of arts as a distant early warning system to let the old culture know what's beginning to happen to it. And that, I think, is exactly where we're at. The old literacy of reading and writing is gone, and in its place, we have this. That's SoundCloud, hard drives, and everything. We live in this kind of amorphous digital universe without a sense of time, and the question of permanence is something. We're locking our creativity, and our music in this case, into all kinds of software, and the software may not be permanent. I've personally seen a lot of my music go away because the software is gone and there's no other way to translate it. And many people are seeing this happen. So the whole question of things being beyond a moment are something that's up for grabs. But we gain a lot. We gain the speed. We gain the power. We gain this ability to distribute everything. It's so fun to be able to just instantly get something out to anyone we want to in the world, get feedback, and feel famous. And that power is seductive. And there's no question that we're going to stop in it. However, we need to consider what we discard, because we are discarding a lot of things. We're definitely discarding the depth and the patience that we've used to absorb layers. And the reason that's something we should pay attention to is that that's where irony comes from. That's where adulthood, in the ways that most of us feel it culturally, that's where it derives. This idea that we see that things can have multiple meanings, and we spend time thinking about those interactions and those contexts. And that is going very fast. The other thing is mastery. We don't really want to master a single skill now because things change so fast. What we want to do is get very adept at adapting so that we can multitask and do a lot of things at the same time. That seems to be something that we're questing for, and so we've discarded mastery. The idea of permanence, as I said before, is something powerful, something that lasts beyond our lifetimes. That may not be a concept anymore as we become cyborgs. And the idea of persistent meaning and identity, all of these come through narrative and context. So what we choose to retain is going to make the difference. Now, I don't mean to sound like a Luddite, because I'm not. I embrace this technology. I will probably become a cyborg like everyone else will, because the power will be irresistible. But I see that people are very hungry for something else. They're hungry for something that lasts longer. I see this when I give music lectures and people say, oh, I wish I didn't quit my instrument. I see this in people listening to symphonies, people who want to watch Shakespeare, people who want to have contact with something that lasts beyond their time. Because ultimately, speed and power are driving this culture of ours towards in this effort as we're shedding our flesh skin in order to have machine skin. But it's beauty and depth that ultimately give us meaning. And that's really what we have to ask. What essentially makes us human beings? The universe awaits our decision. Thank you.